On 100.9 WXIR, this is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Evidence of Design. You are listening here to us on 100.9 FM WXIR. Am I coming through all right here?
I don't think you are.
I don't think I'm coming through. All right, well, let's try one more second here. Hello, test here. Test.
You want to switch microphones real quick?
Right now. Yeah, 1 second. How about now, world? There we go. There we go. So you're listening to Evidence of Design here at 100.9 FM WXIR. Thanks a lot for tuning in. This is episode 20 of our show, and we are really happy to be here. We have a special show for you today. We are talking about contemporary issues in public education, and we have a lot of guests. Of course, we have my good friend and co-host Matt Treadwell.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
We also have Dr. Leslie Myers, the superintendent of the Brockport Central School District, with us today.
Good morning.
We're also joined by Terrell Smith. He's a master's candidate at the Warner School of Education.
Hello, everybody.
And we have Wendy Owens, another master's candidate at the Warner School of Education.
Hello.
And last but not least, Julia DeLuca, the same as well.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us.
So we, again, are going to be talking about contemporary issues in public education. For those who are returning listeners to our show, you know that Matt and I love to talk about the political economy. Namely, how is it that we live in a society with so much income and wealth inequality? Today, I'm sure that many of the topics we'll be discussing about can connect to that explicit piece. Why is it that we have so much income and wealth inequality? I'm sure that we'll be talking about a number of issues in public education, such as segregation, such as how schools are funded, and such as standardized testing, and much, much more. We want to hear from you because this show is all about the community here. So you can participate. Give us a call, 585-219-8889. Give us an email at, that's Twitter. Email us at evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com or tweet us at evidencedesign0. We definitely want to hear from you throughout the hour. What do you think about public education? What do you think some of the major issues are, and what are you seeing, and what can we do about them? Let's all participate. So, Matt, we ready to take it away?
We are.
Let's go for it. Matt, who painted us that pretty word picture right there?
That was a song by Overhand Sam Snyder. He's a local musician and a good friend of mine.
Awesome. Is that off a particular album? And is my mic coming through for anyone?
No, your mic is not on.
So, Julia, we're going to share a mic, so that's going to be all right. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's great.
All right. So, Matt, Overhand Sam, local musician.
Yeah.
Cool. So we'll get into some more, and I believe you're in a band too, Matt, and we'll get into a little bit more of that at the very end. But let's jump right into our topic, talking about contemporary issues in public education. And listeners, you probably know that we are, or I'm at least in a master's program at the U of R, and I'm joined today by a lot of my classmates. And it's really exciting to have this time to share with you all some of the things that we learned and actually just to have a good intellectual discussion about some of the issues in public education. So, Dr. Myers, if we can turn it over to you, and I'm curious, as your role as a superintendent in the Brockport Central School District, or just your long experience in education, what do you see as some of the issues and also successes going on in public education nowadays?
Sure. Thanks, Jason, and thank you, Matt. I have to start by saying I love being a public school educator. I'm entering my 26th year, and I can tell you that there's nothing more fulfilling and more satisfying than working with young people to help them actualize and achieve their goals, not only academically, but athletically, extracurricularly, etc. So I have to start with that perspective or that framework, because I think sometimes people think those of us in education are grumpy and we don't like what we're doing. I see how educators impact young people all the way from when they come in at 4 in pre-K through the time that they graduate when they're 18 and hear public pomp and circumstance. But certainly there are challenges and opportunities that exist within the educational framework. And in the 26 years that I've been an educator, I have seen education kind of evolve, morph, and change. Currently in Brockport, we are experiencing a few things that I think not only other districts in Monroe County, but districts regionally and across the country are experiencing. We certainly have to learn how to do more with less. You know, I have the responsibility as a superintendent to be fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars. So I'm always looking at ways to certainly be innovative and make sure that my students and my staff have the things that they need, but I need to do that in a very fiscally responsible manner. I think the other thing that we're seeing that's morphing and changing is the demographics in our community. In the 6 years that I've been in Brockport, our free and reduced lunch students, so our economically disadvantaged students, has continually increased. Certainly our ethnic and racial demographic is changing, and we're seeing more students of color, so African American, but particularly Hispanic, Latino, and Latina families are moving into our community. But we also have more students who are moving into our community for whom English is not their first language. And so that requires making sure that we have programs and services in place that responsibly and meaningfully support students. And I think you mentioned in your opener about standardized testing, assessments, that has significantly changed. We're eagerly waiting to hear from Commissioner Elia how APPR, the annual professional performance review, is going to change, because as many people know, that has caused a significant outcry, particularly from parents with the opt-out movement and having their students in grades 3 through 8 not participate in assessments. So, we're dealing with not only making sure that we prepare students academically, but we have a myriad now of other things that we need to be concerned about.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Myers. As a leader in education, you talked about some change over time that you're seeing.
Yes.
Do other constituents realize that change over time too? Do you think parents realize that change over time? Do you think students realize that? Do you think teachers? Because you're having sort of a broad perspective on it,
Sure.
and you've been in education for a while. Do you think other folks realize those changes?
I think so. I mean, one thing that I also didn't mention is the increased vigilance relative to safety and security, right? We've seen an increase in school shootings. And so that certainly has something that has come to the forefront. But I think it's situational. In response to your question, I think it's a yes and no. I think those of us who are on the front lines in education notice the changes, right? We're seeing that students may not have enough food to eat. And so it calls the question, how do we support that on the school side? So in Brockport, we participate in a backpack program where we send non-perishable food home with students at the end of the week. And we have a lot of families who participate in the food bank program. So we've shifted that paradigm, and we now host several times during the year where the food bank actually comes to our high school and families can come and get food there. I think individuals are certainly noticing the racial and ethnic change. And we know in particular that there's been interesting dialogue and conversation relative to the urban-suburban program and it becoming implemented in school districts. So some interesting conversations relative to race have occurred, and you've seen that play out in different communities in Monroe County. But even some of the conversations that I am having with parents when I talk to them, I think there is a noticing. But on the other side, I think unless you're socially conscious and mindful about that, you may not notice it. You may just stay in your little bubble, in your little kind of cross-section of your community, and it may not be something that's on your radar screen. But I do have the responsibility to pay attention to it.
That's great. I actually have a quick question about that food bank that you mentioned. That's a really great program that you have. Do you still have that happening during the breaks, for example, winter break, spring break, summer break?
Summer break, no, but we are mindful that during, say, December break or February recess or during the April spring break, that students who are economically disadvantaged may not be getting breakfast at home, right? At least when they're coming to school, they're getting breakfast. So we are very mindful of that and making sure that enough is sent home during that time. I will tell you, though, that what is so powerful for me to see is the kindness and the generosity that my students display. They are taking the food home, but they're saying things like, I just want to make sure that my mom has something to eat or my brother has something to eat. So it's very selfless. They're not overly even concerned about themselves. They're worried about other family members in the home.
And that's a really great thing to have. And I'm really sorry to hear that some of them are in that situation where they have to be not only children but also caretakers of their own parents and the rest of their family.
I think that's something that we're seeing on increase, is that older siblings are taking care of younger siblings. Families, parents have to find jobs that may not fit between the typical 9 to 5 framework. So they may be working 3 to 11 or the overnight shift, which shifts sometimes the responsibility of homework helping, assistance, preparing meals, getting the food, getting the clothing ready, to older siblings.
That's really interesting. And that reminds me of another conversation that we had earlier in the semester, which was about how do we include students' parents when it comes to keeping them involved in students' academic lives, be that them being able to attend parent-teacher conferences, being able to attend other campus events, open houses. And I think Terrell and Jason, you had some really great experiences with trying to navigate that. If you two want to jump in on this as well with Dr. Myers.
Yeah, so my experience with this, I'm a second grade teacher at a public charter school here in Rochester. And how we get our parents involved is we open all lines of communication as much as possible because, like Dr. Myers pointed out, it can be very challenging with times that parents might be working and they are not able to answer the phone. Some of them, are really good about, they'll sneak away and hey, what's going on? So it's really great because at my school, parental involvement is definitely highlighted. We want it. We love it. And in order to reach some of the parents that we don't have, we host many family nights, nights for the kids. So my school, we had like a boys empowerment day, and the dean of students at our school hosts that, where parents can bring their kids in, and it's an informal day. Play basketball, just hang out like as a family. We're all
Nice.
one family in the school, with the students, with the teachers, with the administrators. So it is very challenging, but there are ways to navigate that road.
Sure. I think we have to be creative relative to the way that we approach parent or family engagement. Too many times we think, or we might say, well, the parent is not here, so they don't care about their child. That could be far from the truth. They're just not able for whatever reason, because of their work schedule or because transportation, frankly, could be an issue. So think about where our district is located out in Brockport. Transportation, public transportation in particular, is very difficult. And, just want to put a quick plug in. One of the things that I'm fighting for and working with is the Rochester Transit Authority, because those routes are being reimagined, and I want to make sure, with us being more suburban and rural, that we're not forgotten in that process.
And something else that we've discussed is how a really big barrier could be the language barrier.
Sure.
If you have the parents of students that may be ELL, and Wendy, you did a really great project on this topic, so please, because you know much more about this than I do, but figuring out how we can keep the parents who may not speak, English, I'm sorry, I couldn't think of the word for a moment, who may not be English speaking, how do we keep them
Sure.
involved, and how do we keep them, involved and engaged in their children's academic lives, because we know they want them to be.
Yes, I did do a project on this. And yes, I think the outcome of looking into that is finding out that really the biggest barrier is cost. Getting everything accessible to everyone all the time is very expensive. But it's a cost that is probably worth it, because you're mentioning sometimes the parent isn't there. It could be because they can't be, or because of transportation, or maybe they just didn't know. They didn't have access to the information that a meeting was happening, or that an event was happening. And so,
Or it might not even be in their language for them to understand it. Right?
yeah, so if they came, what would really happen? So, there is it's a complicated issue, and schools do have a lot of legal responsibility there, but, I think it's one of many things that schools are trying to balance, as far as making sure things are accessible.
Absolutely.
And listeners, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to 100.9 FM WXIR. Thanks a lot for being here with us on our 20th episode of Evidence of Design. We're talking today about contemporary issues in public education, and we're joined by Dr. Leslie Myers, Superintendent of the Brockport Central School District, Julia DeLuca, Terrell Smith, and Wendy Owens, master's candidates at the U of R, and also my good friend and co-host, Matt Treadwell.
I'm still here.
Matt is still around. So I've been listening, and what I'm hearing is kind of a struggle in contemporary education today, which is how to define the roles of schools. And to me, I think that we're struggling as a society, and maybe this isn't a new struggle, but we've always struggled to conceptualize what is the responsibility of public education. Because we're speaking about transportation and providing services to students who are poor or low socioeconomic status. We're talking about providing special education services. We're talking about providing translation services to folks who don't necessarily speak English. I'm sure there are folks out there who would argue that that's not the job of schools. The jobs of schools are to send your kids there, get them educated, have them pass tests, and give them a good job. Is that a fair way to kind of share this critique, or is that a fair way to construct this sort of argument between the roles of schools? I'm curious what you all see as the roles of public schools in today's society.
I think that the role in a perfect world, yeah, you should just be able to send your kid, go to school, get education, get a job. But because of just the state, and not just this country, but just that the world is in, and some of the struggles that people might face, unfortunately, our children, our students, have to face that with their parents or even by themselves. So the role that schools take is to fill those gaps as best as possible. And it's extremely challenging. I'm not more of a behind the scenes person, so I don't see a lot of how that operates in a school. But from the outside looking in, I know that as schools, every school really wants to take care of their kids, wants to set them up for success. Our goal at my school, and I'm sure Dr. Myers, all of her schools, is to send her kids to college. Or if not college, to set them up for some sort of success once they graduate. But our goal is to provide the tools that they need. And if that is to give them food, breakfast, lunch, a snack, if that is to make sure that they are getting to school and getting back home safely. On top of that, keeping them safe within our walls. Because we're so involved with children, everything comes to play to keep them safe and to help them get educated. So that's my take.
I would like to say, and I'm probably the least qualified to talk about this of all the people in the room, seeing as I don't have really any experience with education other than I also happen to have gone to college. But I think Jason was asking a bit of a pointed question earlier, but it's something that we've talked about a lot in the past, where I take issue with the idea of education's singular goal being to find employment for people. Mm-hmm. I think there's something, I don't know, almost, there's some value placed on it that transcends just the end result of finding a job, and imparting that on students, I imagine, is extremely difficult, because I know personally I didn't come to appreciate that sort of thing until I myself went to college, and I'm curious to hear what your experiences with that are.
That's a really interesting point. It's kind of like that issue of emphasizing productivity and how to become a productive citizen and one that gives back to society, rather than focusing on a student as just a holistic young person who has their own inherent worth, regardless of whatever future contributions they may be able to make to society. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
I think, yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, and I think, Terrell, you made a really great point, because I absolutely agree with you with the role of schools. I was thinking of it as answering your question, Jason. It's a yes, we should be, educating our students and how to be, well-rounded, educated global citizens. And if we're mandating that students, or you need to go to school, they need to have an education, whether that's, the free public education that they're provided, or if they are able to attend a private or a charter school, we should be able to give them the things that they need, be that food and breakfast, or at lunch, snacks, safe transportation. I'm reminded of the LeBron James I Promise School that just opened, that provides food and free transportation if you live within, I think, 2 miles of the school, as well as providing resources and some GED training to the students' parents. So if a school is, if kids are required to go to school, and the school is required by law to take care of them, in the way we were talking about how they're sort of in loco parentis, when the kids aren't with their parents, the school sort of steps in as their parent. The school should act like a guardian, and they should, make sure that the kids that are within their schools are kept, safe, fed, protected, have the things that they need in order to succeed as future global citizens.
As I think about schools in 2018, I'm reminded a little bit of the sign that's on the Statue of Liberty of "Give me your tired, your poor, your disenfranchised, etc." And that really, I believe, is the philosophy that we have to take. It would be morally and ethically horrible, if we just said, well, this child is hungry, but that's not our responsibility. This child may have been abused. Well, we'll make the CPS call, but after that, it's up to them. Children have morphed and changed, and society has changed. So we're seeing students, unfortunately, who Some children are abused at home. Some students are hungry. Some students have witnessed things that we as adults have no touch points with, right? And so I believe we do have a moral and ethical responsibility to not only make sure they meet or exceed the academic expectations and standards that we have for them, but that we also help to kind of to support them and to mold them, because we do have a requirement per New York State to not only make sure students are college and career ready, but they now have added the third component through Every Student Succeeds Act. They have to be civically ready. So the 3 C's, college, career, and civic ready. So how can you not achieve that without just teaching them, right? It's a little more of that quote unquote softer side of education.
I'm really excited about this sort of philosophy of holistic education for students, focusing on the whole child and college, career, and civic. I think that as someone who's really passionate about voting and democracy, I think that college and career doesn't get to that civic piece. So that's at least really exciting to me. And just listening to all the ways that schools can holistically provide services to students such that they can become successful in their college careers or civic life, I think I think that is necessary for contemporary education. And if we don't do that, so the flip side is if we're not supporting students, I think what happens is sort of discipline kicks in, and perhaps the problems that students have in their home lives or systemic problems comes to manifest in school, and it can be interpreted as misbehavior or just purposeful truancy or something. And Terrell, I know you were working on talking about or researching discipline and how schools approach that. Do you want to speak a little bit about what is like the discipline gap and all of that?
Yeah, sure. So when I came across the term discipline gap, I had no idea what it was. I've heard the achievement gap, which points to the disparities in student achievement between students of color and students that are white. But then coming across the discipline gap, it's like, oh, what's that? And what that's basically saying is like what Jason was pointing out, just the disparity between in-school and out-of-school suspensions between students of color and students that are white, and including students with disabilities and students without disabilities. And those gaps that are present, it's scary because I found those gaps were here in Rochester, and I will say that when they're pointed out, RCSD and many members of the community joined together to reframe their the RCSD code of conduct to address this issue where students of color and students with disabilities were being suspended at alarming rates, and more so for nonviolent types of misconduct. But this isn't just Rochester. This is literally everywhere in the country, and it's a scary thing to really look at. And I think one of us was saying, like, if Jason was actually saying that if it doesn't become about educating our students to close the achievement gap, then that discipline gap starts to grow, because then we're not teaching, we're disciplining, and then it's a disservice. It's so much going on, like here in Rochester and the whole world, and it's like, what do we do about it? How do we keep our kids in the classroom? How do we not make them, but how do we engage them enough to where they love learning, not to where it's just a motion, a system that they have to follow? How do we help our students find their voice so they can speak on the things that they love and that they believe in? And how do we get them to share that? That's my role as an educator, that like I want to help students find their voice so they don't get buried in suspensions or just because if they're dealing with something at home, then they don't know how to communicate that, and then that non-communication turns into not participating, and they get in trouble. Like it's just a weird road.
A cycle.
It's a cycle, exactly,
yeah.
And it's very hard. So that's why every day I go into the classroom, I want, how do I help my kids find their voice so that they can be heard, so confusion isn't there, so that cycle is broken. That's my take.
I know, I don't know if this is the case for all the schools in the city, but I know that, Jason, you've told me the school you work at, East, has a majority of Black and Hispanic students. And in contrast to that, many of the teachers are in fact white. And not to say that these teachers are overtly or even intentionally racist in any way, but something that we don't often, or something I feel like we don't often talk about enough just in general everyday life, is implicit bias and the consequences of that. I open it up to anybody. Are there steps or are there initiatives that you know of or have heard of that can sort of help prepare teachers for that sort of thing?
So college preparation programs, whether they're teacher preparation, school counselor, or administrator programs, have evolved into including more than just one course in diversity or multiculturalism. I mean, when I started in grad school at U of R, I was in the school counseling program. I took one course called Multicultural Perspectives in Counseling, one course of 48 credits, right? And so I have 26 years have passed since that course. And so schools, again, I believe have a responsibility to figure out how to, we've talked about the achievement gap and the discipline gap, but the professional development or training gap certainly exists. So I'm actually excited that you bring that up, because in Brockport, we're starting a diversity certification program that we received a donation from a very generous sponsor that will fund the complete project. The diversity certification program is a way to make sure that educators feel fully equipped to handle the different students that are in their communities. So we're launching 10 months of professional development that are about 3 hours long, and we're having an expert come in, and we'll have a training for about 3 hours during that once a month time frame, where we'll have someone go in depth about African Americans. We'll have somebody go in depth about gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered. We'll have somebody come in and talk about Native Americans, etc. And what I love about the format is that for the first 90 minutes or so, there'll be a training. So talking about characteristics relative to that demographic or group of people. Some stereotypes or things that you should say, things that you shouldn't say. And then the next 90 minutes or so, I'm going to steal a military term. We're calling it permission to speak freely, where hopefully we've created a safe enough space where participants can say, you know what, I'm just going to be honest. I didn't realize I have said or I have thought about this particular group. And so we'll do that over 10 months, 10, 11 months. And then at the end of it, folks will graduate. They'll get a special recognition in their personnel file. And then the goal is to turnkey train that in the schools that they come from. And then a colleague can, almost similar to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, phone a friend. You can call and say, you know what, I'm struggling because the N-word was just spoken in my classroom and I don't know how to handle that. Or there were, gay slurs that as a coach, there were gay slurs made on the football field and I don't know how to address that. So people are fully equipped to not only understand the different, again, demographic groups that exist, but they are trained to respond, to not just ignore it or just to kind of push it under the rug. Because I think that's what happens. People just don't know how to address it when they hear the N-word or hear a inappropriate sexual innuendo, right? So again, this is something that's not required or mandated from the state, but it's something that we feel is very important and valuable. So we are going to start that. So, Jason, I would love to come back after a couple of months and really talk to you about that and how it's working. One thing I failed to mention is the program. We're partnering with the College of Brockport because they want to be culturally competent, and frankly, we're a feeder into the College of Brockport. Many of our students attend that college after graduation. So half of our participants will be from our district and the other half will be from the college. So everything from the superintendent, me, and the college president, Dr. McPherson, to college professors, principals, teachers, nurses. We really want to have this become a part of our framework. So thank you for asking that question.
Sure.
That sounds like a really great program, and something that crossed my mind while you were talking about programming that is not mandated by the state, but that you choose to do anyway. It reminds me of some of my own research that I've been doing, which includes sexual misconduct in schools, which, throwing a wet blanket onto this conversation. But one thing is New York State does not have any mandate that educators or administrators be trained in recognizing sexual misconduct or how to respond to it. So is that something that you were thinking about having the Brockport Central City School District look into, about finding a certification program or a training program about how to recognize those instances of misconduct and how to respond to that?
We actually do a training every year. Now this is with all my administrators though, not my teachers, but at least it's a start. We have an attorney come in and they talk to us about that, about how to handle that, what is appropriate reporting, what are kind of next steps, and to make sure that we don't ignore it. So again, that's something that I feel is important for my administrative leaders to know and be able to do. So that is mandated. Every October of every year, we get a sexual harassment and legal update training from our attorneys. But, I think you'll find as you talk to other leaders, whatever is most important to them beyond the mandates, right, is what gets done. So my passion and heart is around diversity and inclusion. I think it's important to make sure that male or female sexual harassment and hostility does not happen. But it really all depends on what that particular leader values and what is important to them. So you'll find that it will vary. So then it goes back to the question or the comment, do things need to get mandated for them to happen, right? So it's an interesting thing to kind of look at.
I see. No, thank you so much for sharing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're welcome.
That makes me think that whole having to be mandated to do it. You have who's not complacent in your position, and you want to better not only your staff but more of a sense of future leaders, so that they don't become complacent.
Yes.
And I think we need more of that just in this world as general. We don't be a leader just because you're told that you have to do this way. Be a leader because you are innovative and use that innovation to further better everybody. So I think that's great.
And because it's the right thing to do, right? And going back to the question about the disparity that often occurs in districts about seeing individuals who might not be white, male, maybe middle to upper class, Ann Kress, the president of MCC, said something really powerful in a talk I attended, and she said, you can't be it if you can't see it. And I think that is so powerful. There's lots of research and compelling studies out there that speaks to the fact of how important it is for kids to see a reflection of themselves, right, in the people who are leading them. When I was a student at the U of R, I was psych and pre-med. And the first time I came in contact with a professor of color, somebody who looked like me, was when I took a course in the African American Studies department. I did not have one professor of psychology. I didn't have a biology, a chemistry teacher. Now, when I went to Warner, that increased, and I had more teachers of color. But, it just, you're aspiring to a particular goal career-wise. And it gets frustrating, especially you all know being students, you're just like, I've got all this homework and I'm trying to earn this master's degree. It gets discouraging sometimes, and it's helpful just to see somebody in the role, in the position that you aspire to be in, to say, you know what, this is doable for me. I can make it. Someone who comes from my background and experience is successful, and so that gives me hope and encourages me. So it's not just about making sure we have more women or more individuals of color or more people who aren't straight. It's about making sure that children can see from the experience and background that they're currently living in, they can connect to somebody. That is really powerful and very important. And Terrell, I'm sure with you being an African American male, that's so important for kids to see, right? A male of color?
Yeah.
That's important. Because we don't have a lot of males of color. You're what grade? Second grade?
I'm a second grade teacher. Yeah.
How many?
Yeah.
How powerful?
Yeah. I mean, I'm in a very unique position to where a lot of my students, not even just my students, just students in general in the building, where if they don't have a male figure, like I don't know how well I can fill the gap, but I can at least try to some extent and be a role model.
Yes.
That's what I strive to be. And I think that's what all teachers should be, especially male teachers, which there are not a lot of, and then
At
male
the
teachers of
they're
color.
not.
Yeah, and then male teachers of color. But it's an excellent experience and an opportunity to really point them in the right direction.
Exactly.
Like you can go to college if
Yes.
you want. You can. You are smart.
Yes.
You are smart. Like your only thing isn't to either go to the jail or fall victim to the streets,
or
like that's
or
not,
go play football, right?
Or go play football, which is what something that I thought like that's all I had at first, like going through high school. I just played football, and then when I went to college, I didn't go to college to go to college. I went to college to play football, and then it was there. It's like okay, I'd rather have this education when I was in college. It's a weird dynamic, and we need that resource and those points of views and leaders, as you said, that aren't complacent and can be that voice or start that voice for whoever they're teaching.
Absolutely.
So listeners, I think you're hearing a lot about some of the big systemic issues going on in education today and some of the value of our conversation. And we want you to participate. 585-219-8889. Again, 585-219-8889. Give us a call. Let us know your experiences in the public education system and what you see as the strengths and challenges of it today. You're also listening to us here, Evidence of Design at 100.9 FM WXIR. And I think to respond to what we were just talking about, I think a big issue that leads us to seeing, not seeing diversity in the classroom among the teaching staff is because our schools are so segregated nowadays. And, there's a lot of reports out there that our schools are more segregated now than they were in the years immediately following Brown versus Board of Education, which was the 1954 Supreme Court decision that struck down Jim Crow, separate and equal. So that struck that down. But we're living in a society today where, like Matt, you mentioned this earlier, that you can go to schools in the city of Rochester and 85% of the students are, African American or Hispanic. And I think that's an issue where it's really hard to get out of all these other problems when our districts and our neighborhoods and our society itself is segregated. And I'm not sure if anyone else finds that an issue too, or like what do we even do about that to increase the diversity and experience that our students are seeing?
If I may respond to this, I graduated from University of Rochester with a degree in history, and my thesis actually involved Brown v. Board of Education. And I think something that is so interesting that we often overlook when we think about Brown v. Board of Education's legacy is that it was not enforced to its fullest extent. Largely, the separate but equal ruling applied to schools that were segregated in law, especially when you thought of, the Old South, which is what we typically think of. Things were segregated, by law. The legislatures of each state said, we're going to separate the schools on the basis of race, and that's what that was. And once Brown v. Board of Ed came down, those schools needed to integrate. However, when you think about the northern states, especially in the years following the passage of Brown v. Board of Ed, a lot of those places, while they were very segregated, they were not segregated because legislatures said that that they were going to have these separate schools. They were segregated because of racist practices regarding housing, regarding who you can sell your home to, regarding different communities, regarding communities that would be very unwelcome to anyone who they felt did not belong, typically defined as not white.
Right.
So, once you start having... So that is an issue, but that isn't an issue that Brown v. Board of Ed can really address because schools aren't being segregated literally on the basis of race. It's just when you have school districts that are, based on location, and it just so happens that we have a vast concentration of students of color on the inner city, and we have a large population of typically white students, on the outside of the city. And, it's just how that is. But I know that, and I think, Dr. Myers, you had a lot of really great things to say about this when you talked about the rise of the urban-suburban programs, which really help with integrating inner city and suburban schools. So if you want to take that away, because I know it's something you love.
Well, there's a lot of controversy out there about urban-suburban, right? Because certainly it does give the opportunity for students of different races to mix in a suburban environment. So African American or Latino to come into suburban environments. But the key thing is that as a suburban district, we need to make sure that, again, we are inclusive, right? And that they are welcomed into the districts. And so certainly I can control by saying, as the superintendent, this is an important program, I value it, and that message hopefully gets translated and incorporated into the district. But it's, you have, students are going to be students. You have things that happen, inappropriate conversations. So it really, again, goes back to what does the leader value, right, and what is important. And there are only so many students who can participate. I think every year there's about 1,000 students that go into the 13 or 14 districts who participate in urban-suburban. I do want to take a moment, however, to talk about a really great initiative that has recently kind of exploded in the Greater Rochester community. And the program's called Rock to Change. And what it involves is that high school students, so students in grades 9 through 12, and it rotates around the county as far as who sponsors it, is involved in creating a professional development experience specific to race. And so when Brockport sponsored it in November, our kids who hosted it developed a professional development experience that was incredible and was amazing. So, as an administrator, I'm like, okay, guys, we could do this and we could look at that. And they were like, with all due respect, Dr. Myers, that's not what we want to do. Here's what we want to do. But you do need to give us the money to do it, right? So I needed to have the checkbook. But basically, they did the brown-eyed, blue-eyed experiment on video and I couldn't believe. I wasn't surprised at how many students who hadn't seen it, but the number of adults who were not. Remember that happened on the Oprah Winfrey Show. The adults were just like, I've never seen this before. And again, if that's not a part of your repertoire and something that you're interested in, it might not be on your radar screen. And they did a ton of other activities, but the outcome was to write kind of a letter to either the superintendent or the school board saying, hey, in my district, so in Brockport, Penfield participates, so in Penfield, Rush Henrietta participated. They wrote, here are the things that we're concerned with relative to race, and here's what we're hoping that you'll take as some next steps. And so then it rotated over to Churchville Chili, sponsored it in the spring. I think Brighton will host it in the fall of 2018, but it rotates with the different East and West Side school districts. And so you have children, 14 to about 19, and the Rochester City School District participates as well, talking about race and how things can get better, how relationships can improve, and how they can improve conditions in their respective schools along the lines of race. How powerful is that? Mm-hmm. How powerful is that? And young people are leading this, and they're telling the adults, you can come, you can watch, and my kids even planned activities so that the adults for a part of the time were involved in activities away from them so they could really get to the crux of the matter. It was very powerful to watch unfold. I have to give kudos to Jeffrey Crane, the superintendent of West Irondequoit, and his folks. He brought in a team from Ferguson, and today or yesterday was an important 1-year anniversary relative to Michael Brown being murdered. But it was a group came out of Ferguson to West Irondequoit to talk about race relations, and that's how Rock to Change started.
Mm-hmm. That's a great program.
It's powerful.
That sounds like a great example of the holistic education you were talking
Yes.
about earlier, Dr. Myers, with focus on the, I guess, civic duty that we would like to prepare students for.
Absolutely.
And Matt, actually, as someone outside of education, so I think we've talked before about the value of seeing something outside of the institution. All of us who are talking here are kind of in education. As someone outside of education, is anything that we've been talking about strike you? I mean, I'm curious as to what you're thinking about all these conversations, but I do apologize for putting you on the spot, too.
No, I'm used to it at this point.
That's a compliment, I'll take.
I thought you brought up a great point, Julia, earlier when you brought up Brown versus Board of Education. And I think there is a real tendency, from my experience, at least in more northern states, to think of racism as a southern problem. Mm-hmm. It's just got connotations with, like, you know, plantation owners and the Deep South and a thing of the past even sometimes. But the reality is that the more, I guess, less segregated we become, or I should say, the less segregated we become, the more equal our society becomes, the more insidious racism becomes, the more difficult it becomes to really, like, identify it when it occurs. Like, it's very easy to point at, like, slavery, for example, and say, well, obviously that's wrong. It can be much more difficult to explain why following around an African American customer in a store is also wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I think that part of it is we want to believe that racism is over and it's done and that we killed it, air quotes, with Brown v. Board of Ed and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Like, we want to believe that because we passed these great pieces of legislation that certainly serve to help equalize things legally, that it's done and we're past it. But as the last few years have gone to show, it's not. It's racism in all of its forms, be it, I'm not going to go into that, but, like, racism in all of its forms.
That's another
still,
show, too.
Yeah.
That's like 5 more shows.
Exactly.
Yeah, is alive and well. And I think you bring up a really great point when you talk about how, you know, we can all sit here and agree that the group of men that marched through Charlottesville with their tiki torches from Target, yelling their racist and anti-Semitic slurs, like, yeah, that's bad. But what about the insidious, the more microaggressions? What about when you walk up to an African-American woman with a natural hair and you say, oh my gosh, it's so great, can I touch it? And you just start, like, kind of patting her.
No, you don't ask, you just actually touch it.
Yeah.
Oh, you know, yes, thank you for correcting me. Or, like you said, when I was with a group of friends for a different class earlier this year where it was me, I'm a white woman, and I was with 2 other classmates who were women of color, and we walked into a CVS, and we were just looking at the makeup, browsing, and they just looked to each other and they're like, oh, we're being watched again. And I'm like, what? Like, they're so casual about it, too. And I think that's another thing we forget is how, for us, for white people, we want to think that that's something of the past, but for a lot of people who may not look like us, that still is a daily experience.
Yep.
And yeah,
I just wanted to say real quick that in response to that, Dr. Myers, you brought up earlier when we were talking about that 11-month program that you mentioned,
The diversity certification program. Mm-hmm.
You said something like, how much do you decide to mandate, basically? And I'm not like anywhere near prepared to talk about it in length, but I know that in our private lives and on this show, Jason and I have spoken at length about our belief that if you change the law, the culture will change to reflect that. And I think it is important to fight things like racism and sexism and any kind of discrimination on a legislative level. So
I don't disagree with you. Yeah. So, and that's why advocacy within education, which is, again, another 5 shows that we could cover, that is so critically important that you understand what the components of education are and what you need to advocate successfully, hopefully, for relative to the law. That's an area that sometimes we say, well, I don't have time. I'm worried about keeping my school safe, or I'm worried about making sure I have enough money to fund, but advocating for key components within your school community is equally important.
I agree. And something I'd like to add to that as well, and this is reflecting back on my own personal research, where I deal in sexual misconduct in higher education institutions as well as some secondary institutions, is the law is very clear about what institutions are supposed to do when it comes to cases of alleged sexual misconduct. But a lot of times it's not enforced to its fullest extent. And I think something else that we really need in our schools are brave and forward-thinking administrators who are going to enforce these laws and these protections to their fullest extent and really protect those students that are under their care.
I don't disagree with you.
So we just have a few moments left here, 2 minutes about, and I'm wondering if we can quickly go around the table and each of us can share what we hope to see change in education or something that we're passionate about fighting for. And this is like a 20-second response here, so no thesis, but I'll go first to give you time to think. And I will just hope, as mentioned before, that we all just continue to view each student as our own. It sounds cliche, but our youth, we're all stakeholders in the future of our youth, and I think it's really important that as a society we come together to support public education because it helps every single person in the society and that we support the holistic needs of those students as well.
All right. Thank you for that, Jason. I would say that my focus is on, like I said, sexual misconduct in higher education and secondary education because it is something that can affect all of our students regardless of gender identity or race, background, ethnicity, ability. And it is our responsibility to see that and address it to our fullest extent and our abilities as educators, administrators, and as people who have the ability to put a stop to something and stop the normalization of sexual violence in our society.
Going back earlier to when we were talking about what schools have to do and what they should be responsible for doing as far as caring for students, I think I'd like to see a society in which other public institutions were better at taking care of our children so that schools could put more of a focus on educating.
I truly believe that each child is unique and wonderfully made, and that they each have a talent and a gift that they bring to school with us every day. Parents entrust their child with us, and so my hope is that every single educator working in a school setting is loving and kind, not only displays their expertise, but is loving and kind and compassionate and meets every student right where they are. That's important to me.
So my thing is that education isn't just a steady river, it's an ocean that is continuously changing. And as educators and administrators, teachers, we need to move with that current, and it's going to always change, and you need to be able to adapt to those changes.
Well, thank you all for this conversation. Folks, this was Evidence of Design, episode 20. We talked about contemporary issues in public education here at 100.9 FM WXIR. And thank you to WXIR for hosting these types of conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Myers, for coming on. Thank you, Julia DeLuca. Thank you, Terrell Smith. And thank you, Wendy Owens. So in our very last few seconds here, I'm a pretty modest dude. Matt's a pretty modest dude. And we do want to share, though, Matt, you're a local musician, and I think you're pretty good. And,
thanks.
And you're playing your first show.
I'm playing 2 shows for an album I made.
Awesome.
One's coming up this Friday, and one after that, the same Friday.
And
different Friday. It's on the same day of the week, Friday.
Where can folks catch you, Matt?
I'll be at Small World Books on August 17th, and I'll be at the Bug Jar on August 24th.
And you have an ad to encourage folks to...
I have an ad I made to scare people away.
Let's hear it, folks. Thanks a lot for listening. Evidence of Design. Be well, be safe. Bye-bye. Here's a little bit from Matt Treadwell.